Welcome back to What the Health, the podcast that bypasses the bullshit and we tackle the hard truths about medicine, mental health, and the future of healthcare. Today, we're going to dive into a topic that's been stirring up a lot of controversy. It's ignited hope and challenges everything we thought we knew about mental health treatment. Psychedelics in medicine. Yep, you heard me. So imagine this. You've tried everything for your mental health, therapy, medications, the so-called gold standard treatments, but nothing works. Your depression lingers, your trauma stays, your addiction tightens its grip. You're stuck in a cycle you can't escape. And every door that's supposed to lead to healing, it slams shut in your face. Now, imagine your doctor hands you a prescription. But instead of Prozac or Xanax, it says psilocybin, MDMA, ketamine. The same substances that were once demonized as party drugs, tied to counterculture and criminalized in the war on drugs, are now being studied as some of the most effective mental health treatments we've ever seen. So what's real? Are psychedelics the breakthrough we've been waiting for, or are we opening the door to a whole new kind of risk? Why is the government suddenly changing its stance after decades of fear and misinformation? And most importantly, can these drugs actually save lives? Today, we're going to break it all down. The science, the controversy, the politics, and the real people whose lives have been changed by psychedelic therapy. Buckle up, guys. This is not your typical mental health discussion. All right, so let's start with what's actually legal, what's being studied, and what's just hype. Because let's be honest, when some people hear psychedelic medicine, they immediately picture a bunch of hippies tripping on shrooms in a field. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about clinical settings, controlled dosages, guided therapy sessions, and strict medical oversight. This isn't about getting high. This is about healing. So let's start with what's already being used in medicine and how the hell it works in your brain. First up, ketamine. This was originally used as an anesthetic, and sometimes it still is in the ER and the operating room. Ketamine was found to have an unexpected superpower. It lifts depression like nothing we've ever seen in medicine. And it does it fast. Like you walk into the clinic suicidal and you walk out feeling hopeful fast. But how does it work? So most antidepressants like Prozac or Zoloft work by increasing serotonin over time, like 6 to 8 weeks to feel effects. They take, like I just said, weeks to kick in, and for a lot of people, they don't work at all. And ketamine is a totally different game. It blocks NMDA receptors in the brain, which sounds complicated, but it just means it helps reset overactive stress pathways in your mind. It also increases glutamate. This is like the brain's electricity. It helps your neurons fire and communicate quicker. It also creates new synapses. This is the connection between your brain cells. So it's literally rebuilding parts of the brain that depression has been destroying for years. Think of it like this. Depression digs deep-ass ruts in your brain. Negative thought loops, hopelessness, feeling stuck, all dug deep in your brain by depression. Now, ketamine comes in, and it's like a fresh snowfall over those ruts. It gives your brain a chance to make new pathways. And that's why people who've been stuck in depression for decades, people who have tried every medication, every therapy, everything, sometimes feel better after just one ketamine session. But there is a catch. Ketamine effects fade over time, so people often need maintenance doses. And it can be addictive. It's not a take-home pill. It's a supervised treatment. And it's crazy expensive and often not covered by insurance. So that's a bit of a deterrent for most people. So while ketamine works, it's not a perfect solution. But let's go on to the next big thing, MDMA, also known as ecstasy or Molly, which might just prove to change trauma therapy forever. All right, so MDMA, the love drug. And before you say it, wait, you mean the stuff people take at raves? Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about, but in a medical setting. MDMA isn't about partying. It's about unlocking trauma, rewiring your brain, and giving you, those people that have PTSD out there, your life back. So how does MDMA work in therapy? Well, it floods the brain with serotonin, dopamine, and oxytocin. Remember, serotonin equals happy, relaxed, safe. Dopamine makes you feel motivated and engaged. And oxytocin, oh, what a great drug. It helps you feel connected and trusting. Now imagine that you've been through years of serious trauma. Maybe you were a combat veteran. Maybe you survived childhood abuse. Maybe you lost someone in a way that just shattered you. When you think about those experiences, your brain locks up. It's flooded with fear, guilt, and shame. And MDMA turns that fear response down. For the first time, people can talk about their trauma without feeling like they're being re-traumatized. I'm going to tell you a story about a guy named Alex. So Alex was a 31-year-old Marine Corps veteran. He was deployed to Afghanistan twice. So Alex was the kind of guy who didn't just follow orders. He led from the front. He was a Marine, proud to serve, eager to defend his country, and built like a fucking tank, but with a heart twice the size. His best friend Mike was his ride or die. They met in boot camp, bled through the same grueling drills, and pushed each other past limits they never thought they'd survive. They learned to endure together, to fight together, to laugh in the face of exhaustion together. And after their first deployment, they walked into a tattoo shop and got matching ink, a small insignia on their ribs, a quiet promise sealed in ink and skin that said, "Till the wheels fall off." They were supposed to watch each other's back, always. But war doesn't really care about promises. And on a scorching day in Afghanistan, in a flash of fire and twisted metal, that promise shattered. It was their second tour in Afghanistan when everything went to hell. Their convoy inched down a narrow dirt road outside of Kandahar, the kind of place where dangers sat just beneath the surface, waiting. The sun was a relentless furnace overhead, baking the earth, turning their air into a shimmering, suffocating haze. Dust clung to their skin, their gear, their lungs. Alex sat shotgun in his Humvee. His rifle was balanced across his lap. Every muscle was coiled, every sense on high alert. The air shimmered thick with dust, so hot it felt like the sky itself was boiling. The kind of heat that stuck to your skin, sank into your bones, made every breath feel like you were inhaling fire. Sweat was gathering under Alex's body armor, trickling down his spine. But he barely noticed. He knew better than to let discomfort distract him. Up ahead in the lead vehicle, Mike's voice crackled over the radio, cutting through the silence. "I swear, if I have to eat one more of those damn MREs, I'm going to file a Geneva Convention complaint. This has to be a war crime, right, Alex?" Alex smirked. Same old Mike, always finding a way to joke, even when they were one bad day away from never going home. "First thing I'm doing when we get back, ordering the biggest, greasiest pizza I can find. And if any of you even look at my plate, I swear to God, I'll..." Alex was still laughing when the world exploded. A deafening explosion ripped through the air and pried open the lead Humvee like a tin can. Alex's world blurred into chaos. His ears were filled with sounds of screams and gunfire. His nostrils flooded with the smell of burning flesh. There was nothing else, only flames, shrapnel, and thick black smoke curling into the sky. Alex ran towards the wreckage, lungs burning, ears still ringing from the blast. The world around him blurred, gunfire shouting, the heavy thud of his boots against scorched earth. None of it mattered. Only one thought pulsed through his brain. Get to Mike. The flames were already consuming what was left of the Humvee. Heat seared Alex's skin, the edges of his sleeves already smoldering, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. And then he saw him. Mike. Trapped beneath the wreckage, twisted metal crushing everything below his waist. His uniform was shredded, soaked in blood and something darker, something slick and wet. His face, God, his face! One side burned raw, the other smeared with soot and dirt, barely recognizable beneath the mess of torn flesh and swelling. But his eyes gazed right into Alex's. And he said, "Alex, get me out of here, man. Don't let me die like this." His voice was barely a whisper, raw, fragile, like a man already teetering on the edge of death. Alex dropped to his knees, hands scrambling for something, anything, to grab onto. He pulled, he yanked, he screamed through gritted teeth. Nothing moved. Mike's legs were gone, crushed into something that didn't even look human anymore. Blood pooled beneath him, soaking the dirt, turning it into a sticky, blackened sludge. Come on, Mike, stay with me. I got you. I got you, man. Alex shouted, yanking at the twisted wreckage, his fingers slipping on the slick metal. Mike let out a ragged gasp, blood bubbling up at the corners of his lips. His hands twitched in Alex's grip. I don't want to die, man. Alex screamed for the medics, for God, for anyone. But there was nothing left to save. Mike's grip loosened. His chest rose, shuddered, and then stilled. A heartbeat, a second, then nothing. And that was it. Just like that, his best friend was gone. A few months later, Alex made it home in one piece, at least on the outside. Physically, he was fine. No missing limbs, no visible scars. Just another soldier finishing his tour, returning to normal life. But inside, the war never ended. It followed him home, clung to him like smoke from the burning wreckage. It crept into his mind every night, pulling him back to that dirt road in Kandahar. It whispered in his ear every morning, reminding him of the one thing he could not change. Mike is dead, and you're still breathing. The guilt wrapped around his throat like a noose, tightening every time he closed his eyes. So he drank. He drank to forget, but he couldn't drown his memories. He avoided his family. How do you explain what the smell of burning flesh smells like? And he kept a gun by his bed, not just for protection, but in case he decided one day that waking up wasn't worth it anymore. And he tried everything. Therapy, meds, VA support groups. Therapy felt like digging a knife into an open wound. Meds turned his world gray, but the ghost stayed in vivid color. And the support groups, too many stories sounded like his own, and he couldn't survive hearing it all again. While Alex wasn't at war anymore, the war was still inside him. Every day felt like a battle he was losing, fighting against the ghost, the guilt, the memories that wouldn't fade. He was exhausted, tired of drinking, tired of pretending, tired of waking up at all. Then one night, staring at the bottle of another whiskey glass, he heard about something different. MDMA-assisted therapy. At first, he scoffed. Take ecstasy and talk about your trauma? Yeah, sounds like some kind of nonsense a college burnout would suggest. What could a party drug possibly do for him? But then he read a little more. How it was helping veterans just like him. Guys who had tried everything just like him. Guys who thought nothing could ever pull them out of the hell in their heads, just like him. So he decided to try. One session. One last shot. After 2 weeks of second-guessing himself, sleepless nights, and nearly backing out, he finally walked into the therapist's office. He sat down, hands clasped, shoulders heavy, words lodged somewhere deep in his throat. He had told his story before to therapists, to VA doctors, to himself in the dead of the night, but never like this. This time, he wasn't just telling it. He was about to feel it. With a sigh that felt like surrender, he swallowed the pill, half convinced it wouldn't do a damn thing. And then it hit. Not like a drug, not like a high, but like a warmth creeping into his frozen limbs, like stepping out of a burning building and taking the first real breath of fresh air in years. That rush of serotonin, the feeling of warmth flooding his body, no, not just his body. It filled in the spaces he thought had gone numb forever. The tightness in his chest, the crushing weight of guilt, it was still there, but for the first time, it didn't suffocate him. For the first time since that day, he said Mike's name, and somehow his throat didn't choke on the words. He could see the explosion in his mind, but it no longer sent him spiraling. He wasn't paralyzed by the fear. He felt emotions that weren't just rage or grief, emotions he thought were long dead. After months of agony, Alex finally let go of the blame that he'd been shouldering all alone. Session by session, the war inside him stopped feeling like a life sentence. The memories didn't vanish, but they no longer held him hostage. When the treatment ended, he wasn't magically fixed, but the first time, he felt like he had a chance to heal, a chance to move forward, a chance to finally be free. And that's the thing about psychedelics and therapy. They don't rewrite your past, and they don't erase your pain, but they do help you see it differently. and they give you the strength to carry it forward. They take the weight that's been crushing you and shift it, just enough for you to stand up, just enough for you to take a step forward. For Alex, the war didn't disappear, the scars didn't fade, but for the first time, they were no longer the only thing he could see. And Alex's story isn't unique. There are thousands of people struggling just like him. Veterans, abuse survivors, people who have been through hell and never found a way back. The science behind psychedelic therapy isn't just promising, guys. It is revolutionary, but it's still not widely available. And that's why we need to push for more research, more access, and more options for people who run out of them. And that's what we're going to talk about next. But first, a message from Dr. Sarah Baxley, our most generous sponsor and the founder of Access Now Primary Care. Dr. B is going to tell you about her clinic and how it's changed the healthcare game by making access to healthcare as easy as clicking a button. Welcome back. Before the break, we talked about Alex's story, how MDMA-assisted therapy helped him process trauma when nothing else worked. And he is not alone, guys. There are thousands, millions of people just like him. Veterans, trauma survivors, people drowning in depression, addiction, and memories they can't escape. People who have tried everything and have been failed by traditional medicine. For them, psychedelics could prove life-changing. But unfortunately, not everyone sees it that way. The controversy around psychedelics isn't new. For ages, these drugs have been demonized, labeled as dangerous, and dismissed as reckless. And I get it. We've been conditioned for decades to believe that psychedelics are nothing but dangerous party drugs. The government told us they were addictive. The media painted them as reckless. The war on drugs turned them into a symbol of counterculture, rebellion, and crime. But what if that was never the full story? What if I told you that some of these dangerous substances are now proving to be more effective than traditional antidepressants? What if I told you that the only reason they aren't mainstream treatments yet is because of the decades of misinformation, politics, and fear? Because the truth is, these substances are saving lives. Research from institutions like Johns Hopkins and Harvard prove it. The FDA is on the verge of approving it, and people like Alex, they're walking proof that these treatments aren't just hype. They work. So for the critics who argue that psychedelics will become the next opioid crisis, that using psychedelics in therapy is a slippery slope, it will inevitably lead to people misusing them, I say this: you're wrong. Unlike opioids, psychedelics aren't physically addictive. Studies have shown that MDMA, what Alex used, has no withdrawal symptoms. In fact, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies is pushing for MDMA to be FDA approved for PTSD by 2025. That is this year, guys. Psychedelics aren't just a trend. They're tools that work when nothing else does. The bottom line, the war on drugs didn't just criminalize psychedelics, it buried decades of promising research. Research that should have saved lives. Research that's only now resurfacing. So let's get into it. What does the science actually say? Why are some of the world's leading medical institutions, Johns Hopkins, Harvard, NYU, the FDA itself, pushing for psychedelic-assisted therapy? And the biggest question of all, if these treatments work, why did it take so long for the world to listen? Well, the short answer, politics, stigma, and fear. The long answer? That starts decades ago. Before the war on drugs, before psychedelics became counterculture icons, before fear replaced science. In the 1950s and 60s, research on psychedelics was thriving. Scientists were studying LSD for alcoholism, psilocybin for depression, and even early versions of MDMA for trauma therapy. In 1953, the U.S. military was already testing LSD for potential psychiatric treatments. By the early 1960s, psychiatrists were using psilocybin in therapy to help patients process deeply buried trauma. A 1966 study showed that LSD could help reduce alcohol dependence, with 50% of participants staying sober after a single session. But then, the world changed. By the late 60s, psychedelics weren't just in research labs. They were in the streets, at protests, at music festivals. The counterculture movement embraced them, and in response, the government cracked down hard. By 1970, the Controlled Substances Act classified psychedelics as a Schedule I drug, meaning they had no medical use and were as dangerous as heroin. Federal funding for psychedelic research vanished overnight, and decades of promising studies were abandoned. And just like that, a medical revolution was shut down before it even started. For decades, psychedelics weren't seen as medicine. They were seen as a rebellion, a danger to traditional values, a threat to the status quo, a symbol of everything the establishment wanted to suppress. So began the war on drugs. This so-called movement wasn't just about public safety. It was about control, controlling the narrative, suppressing the science, and ultimately restricting access to treatments that had the power to save lives. The truth wasn't just ignored, it was buried on purpose. But if history has taught us anything, it's this: the truth never stays buried forever. So fast forward to today. Johns Hopkins, NYU, and Imperial College London have resurrected psychedelic research, and the results are astonishing. Psilocybin for depression. A 2020 Johns Hopkins study found that 2 doses of psilocybin provided rapid and significant reductions in major depression, effects that lasted for over a year for some patients. MDMA for PTSD. This was a 2021 phase 3 clinical trial funded by MAPS, found that 67% of participants with severe PTSD no longer met the criteria for PTSD after just 3 MDMA-assisted therapy sessions. That's 2/3 of people walking away with their lives back, friends. Psilocybin for end-of-life anxiety. This is a study at NYU and UCLA. It shows that a single psilocybin session can dramatically reduce anxiety and depression in terminally ill patients, giving them peace in their final months. And this isn't just coming from small fringe studies. These are the same institutions that develops treatments for cancer, heart disease, infectious diseases. Even the FDA is paying attention. MDMA is expected to be FDA approved for PTSD by this year. And psilocybin, not far behind. Let me be clear. Psychedelics aren't a cure-all. They're not magic, and they're not for everyone. But for people like Alex, people who have tried everything else and still can't escape their pain, these treatments are offering something they haven't had in years: a real chance at healing. I want to emphasize that this episode wasn't about glorifying drugs. It was about understanding the power that they have, both to heal and to harm. Psychedelics are powerful. They can heal. Psychedelics are tools. In the wrong hands, they can be misused, but in the right hands, they can save lives. And people are desperate for something that works. If you take one thing away from today, let it be this: we can no longer afford to ignore options that work. If you've struggled with depression, trauma, addiction, you know what it feels like to run out of options. Maybe this is the answer. Maybe it's not. But one thing I know for certain: the laws are changing, the research is unfolding, and the fight for access is only just beginning. And we can no longer afford to avoid the conversation. And this is so much bigger than using psychedelics in medicine, guys. It's about hope. It's about reclaiming lives that were written off as untreatable. It's about whether we're willing to break free from decades of fear and finally embrace what science is telling us. The research is undeniable. The science is there. The stories are real. And the question isn't whether psychedelics have the potential to heal. It's whether we have the courage to listen. Because the time for hesitation is over. People are suffering now. And the answers? Well, they may have been right in front of us all along. Next time on What the Health, we're tackling something equally urgent: the doctor shortage. Why are so many healthcare providers burning out? What does it mean for you as a patient? And what happens when there just aren't enough doctors left to take care of us? Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. And until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and always choose kindness. Take care.